Sinie la hamanieta hanje, hadas dilemnie hedasla, aun tolo indie hebantar, ejo manai, aslahanchi.
Oh, finally you've arrived. Do come in, the adventure is about to start.
Welcome to the Fanitarium.
Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of our Fanitarium interviews. Today we're going to be having another author on, one that I've had the honor of talking to for quite a bit, and is also the reason why we finally got Stackpole on after 6 years of trying. I can give him that honor of being the reason why. So welcome to the show, Gary. Do you want people to know your last name so they can hunt you down author-wise, or just call him Gary?
Well, I don't know if I want them to hunt me down, but they're welcome to find me online. It's okay. I'm Gary Bloom, and I don't hide that. They can find me on Twitter. They can find me out there in the universe.
So you are doing a very fascinating project right now with your, as we were just discussing it, I was calling them serials. But why don't you tell people about the project that you're working on right now, and then we'll dive into a little bit about you.
Sure. So Antares Ascended is, and I do like that the idea of a serial almost harkens back to the old pulps, but it's basically a monthly sci-fi series that I'm writing, and the first month kicked off actually this month. The first issue of my main story and my first entry of my mythology kicked off as well, and I'm running that on Patreon. And the idea is that it is it's an alien species in an alien star system, a planetary system that I made up with input from others like yourself, and it's just kind of exploring how this new alien race that's descended from folks who, I don't mind giving the spoiler, most people should recognize that they're descended somehow from humans. And it's really getting into the kind of the interplay between the Archon, who is an emperor for lack of better words, of this empire, and his nephew, who has committed some pretty heinous atrocities because he thinks that he should be actually ruling in his stead. And it's really the fallout around that and what kind of happens with them as they go forward, and a bit of a warlike people that they are.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of a mix of the way the politics are in, say, Dune, and a game series I grew up with called Masters of Orion.
Very cool. Well, I'll be honest. So I'm going to be 41 in a couple of days, or depending on when this goes out, I just turned 41. And I've probably been reading science fiction since I was about 8 years old, and there's a lot of influences that have floated through over the years. I mean, very much the Star Wars Legends series, and definitely a big Dune reader, and for those who know David Eddings' The Belgariad, and a lot of Dragonlance and stuff like that.
Love me some David Eddings. One thing I regret is, I've done this show now for 7 years, and I've had people like Michael Moorcock on, I've had Salvatore on, Greenwood on, Stackpole on. I regret that Eddings, who's my favorite author of all time, died before I even started, and that was, that's sad because I read his books all the time, from his Sparhawk books to his Belgariad and Malloreon. I read all the time, and the only time I've ever been disappointed by his books was one of his last series that ended with a Deus Ex Machina, and it drove me nuts.
I heard the last series was not great.
Yeah,
I heard the last series was not great, and that's the only one that I didn't go into. Everything else is fantastic. And as you know, I'm a very big Michael Stackpole fan. So definitely feel that there's a lot of influence from him and Troy Denning, Timothy Zahn. A lot of influence from those guys.
all of which we've had on the show, which is awesome. So that's great. It's one thing that I find really fascinating is people who grew up with Star Wars, who grew up loving the Star Wars legends. Zahn, Anderson, Stackpole, even Denning and so on. They're ones that we all love, and then add Forgotten Realms and the fantasy that we kind of formed a lot of the games and so on, or even played as kids. All these authors are still around, still writing, and they're still really good. Salvatore came out with a Drizzt book not that long ago, like a month ago, and it's really good and went in the direction that he's never done before, which is surprising because he's done so many of them. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you are. I'm sure he must have mentioned it when he was on the program, but I've been following Michael Stackpole on his Patreon, and that's been really interesting because he got into the universe of a book that he wrote called "In Hero Years I'm Dead." He's doing a sequel to his Italian Revenant, so it's actually been really, really neat to get to just see this guy cranking out great stuff. And it's been, I don't want to call him old, but I'm old now, so make of that what you will.
So when did you first realize you wanted to also write?
I started toying around with it in college. I just found I had some fun with some short stories and messed around with some stuff. I had actually created I created I created a role-playing game of my own back when I was about, 8, 9 years old, that my brother and a couple of my friends and I would play because the older kids thought we weren't cool enough to play Dungeons and Dragons with them. And I'll let that sink in for a moment. So, I kind of messed around with that, and I would write the stories that would go along with that. And then as we got older, we started playing the Star Wars role-playing game. And my best friend and I started realizing that instead of trying to pool our money to buy new adventures, we could write our own. And then I went through and I read the Blood of Kerensky trilogy by Stackpole in BattleTech, and I ended up actually writing a Star Wars adventure, Star Wars role-playing game adventure when I was, probably 8th or 9th grade, that was very heavily, using that stuff. And I just, I kind of got the bug that by the time I got to college, I started writing some short stories, had started on I started working on a novel that was kind of a sci-fi superhero, which if I could ever find the floppy disk, then I'd have to find something that could play the floppy disk so I could get it back. But by the time I guess it was a junior, I was running a company, where it was internet early days, and a buddy of mine and I had started a small company, and it was science fiction based, and I started writing a monthly series called Star Killers. And it was a post-apocalyptic based mostly in the U.S. And then I had a secondary title going every month, and had actually started on a third title, graduated, kept it going for probably my first year or two out of college until I finally shut it down, and just for lack of time, not for lack of ideas. So this stuff just kind of kept bubbling for years.
Nice. And, with the authors that you grew up with, ironic that people are saying how you were, say, too young to be playing it because, Forgotten Realms.
No. I wasn't too young to be playing Dungeons and Dragons. I wasn't cool enough to be playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Because, Forgotten Realms was created by Ed Greenwood when he was 7.
Oh, yeah.
Those are his adventures when he was 7, and they kind of now grow beyond him, even though he's still the brainchild of all of it. But that started as a child. A lot of these ideas started with all these people as children, and then they kind of grew.
Well, it's just, to me, reading this stuff, and it's funny because my parents are very, very big readers, and they like mysteries. Long-time Ellery Queen subscribers, and but my father thought that I might enjoy science fiction, and he had kind of steered me a little bit towards that, even though that's not a genre he particularly enjoys. And it just, it was such a rich tapestry that as like an 8 and 9-year-old, I know a lot of other kids would try and stay up to see if they could watch TV. And I would wait till lights out and then grab a flashlight and, go under the covers and sit and read a book until probably like midnight and then pass out. And I just found myself so drawn into these worlds that I wanted to live in them. And getting into doing role playing game stuff was just the ability for me to really live in those worlds. And it wasn't until I started figuring out that I could actually write full-fledged stories of my own that I could really just live in that mindset a lot.
And that is something I think a lot of us who listen, who have been here for a long time, fully understand. Because this show started off as a podcast for a Star Wars role-playing message board 7 years ago, where we share our stories and be able to play. And, that board was around for 15, 20 years. And, so we definitely know where that comes from. And then a lot of us have since gone and started writing things, be it, something short or be it novels. And role-playing has been a very awesome way to come up with those stories, especially once you learn to break free of the rules. Definitely like that one. And I also grew up with a house where my dad would see me reading Eddings or Orson Scott Card and be like, here, try Vonnegut or try Dune, and some of them I'd be like, no, I don't want to read Kurt Vonnegut. I'll read Ender's Shadow or something like that one. But but to each his own. But he definitely try to push all these authors on me to see what ones I like, what ones stick, and what ones don't. And the ones that stuck really well, and the ones that didn't, well, there's lots of books out there. You don't have to read everything.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, listen, there are things that I feel like, man, I got to get to that eventually. I have a friend who got me into reading Game of Thrones probably about I don't know. I guess I read the actual Game of Thrones book roughly 9 months before the show came out, and I had gotten through 2 of the books and was on the 3rd as the first season was coming on. And these have been around forever.
Yeah.
It's my wife is the one she's not a big science fiction fan, but she's the one who got me to read Ready Player One and
Armada.
Oh yeah, and Armada. Oh, Armada was awesome. I want them to make a movie out of Armada, and I want them to make it right.
I think I liked Armada more because it's like pixels mixed with Ender's Game. And
well, now you're calling my favorite book of all time. But yeah, I mean, it's getting into this stuff, and I was lucky. I had parents who encouraged it. I had teachers who encouraged it. I feel bad for kids who somehow listen. I come from a family with a lot of teachers in it, and I know that there are a lot of good teachers, but every so often you get a bad one. And my brother ended up getting discouraged from reading very, very early on, and I always felt bad for him that he doesn't have that escape into these amazing universes.
That's really sad. I work in a middle school, and getting kids to read is incredibly hard. But there was one kid who this year you'd be like, "Can I borrow Ender's Game?" Okay. And he brought it back the next day and "Can I borrow the next one?"
Nice.
Okay. And he brought back the next day. And if you're reading Xenocide and Children of the Mind willingly in middle school, go for it. Because those are a bit deeper than Ender's Shadow and those books get.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a lot. Listen, yeah. What did he used to call it something like Kitties in Space or something like that. And that for a little while he didn't love Kitties in Space, and then he enjoyed going back to it. And those 3, and I've explained that to some friends as they've gotten into it. They're really a trilogy unto themselves and have very little to do with the original book. And there's a lot of deep philosophy going on in there.
Incredibly deep.
I mean, I've told folks, it's like, listen, if you're going to read Dune, you've got to, especially if you've not gone into a lot of hardcore science fiction before, the first book, you really need to do it without, there can't be a TV in the background. You can't be trying to pay attention to a kid at the same time, because Dune has some just the economics of it and the religion and the philosophy and so much of it. That first book is a hard book, but it's worth it when you get through it. And just, I mean, I know that there's a mix of opinion there, but the fact that, that his son and Anderson have gone through and they've really made this a bigger universe with all the prequels and them going through with the new sequels. I'm grateful for it. I truly am. I mean, they actually did a trilogy, and I don't know if you've read it or if you've heard of it. It's actually called Hellhole.
Yes.
And it's a lot of Dune elements that were really tremendous, and there were actually a couple of ideas that it had sparked some of the stuff that had been foundationary for Antares Ascended, and just things that I ended up, obviously toggling as I, into other directions as I went through. But yeah, I mean, that's always been something that has intrigued me. It's like, I really like this, but what if we did this a little bit different? And then I like this, and what if we did that a little different? And it was almost as if with Hellhole, they were going, we really love doing, and we're going to keep doing that. But what if we did this ever so slightly different and tweaked this here? It's like, that's cool to me. It's very interesting.
And then I like how, because if back to Ender's Game, those books, I had Orson Scott sister as my English teacher in college, and he visited.
So cool.
He visited once, and he basically said he wrote Speaker of the Dead through Children of the Mind for himself.
Okay.
He wrote Ender's Shadow and those books for the fans. And I think I see what he was meaning when he said those comments, because Children of the Mind and so on, those books are definitely him delving into some philosophy, some inner turmoil, an itch that really needed to be scratched. He was trying to dive into a thought process.
Yeah.
While Ender's Shadow, which I do prefer the Shadow books more, because it's like How to Conquer the World 101. Except the epilogue. I didn't care for the epilogue. I'm still waiting for that book that's supposed to come out to connect the two trilogies.
That's been rumored for.
He teased it on the audiobook of Children of the Mind. He said, "I'm writing this book to connect." Yeah, because there's the end of the audiobook. There's like his little interview that's also recorded. He's like, "I'm writing this one to connect." I'm like, you need to do it. Hurry up! You wrote Formic Wars. Continue. Do something.
It's like George R. R. Martin. I mean, it's
except less of a tease than him.
Yeah,
he's just slow.
It's just hey George, will you finish the book before you die? But yeah, I think Card is just. Listen, something. It's almost like he gets caught up and a new idea comes and he has to go, and like you said, scratch the itch, right? It's like I got to do this. I got to go try this and go in that direction, because he's done some other stuff. Like he's done some non-Ender things.
He's done religious books. He's done his own personal books. He writes what he wants.
Comes back to it, and it's. I think that's sort of how I feel about it sometimes too. It's like. I had released my Olympus Union series years ago, and then when I went off and I actually had stopped and I went and I did a comic book, and I ran a comic book for about about a year and a half, and ended up putting out 5 issues. And
what's the name of the comic book?
Oh, the comic book is Red Lance. It's gone. I mean, it was mostly digital only. If you want, here I have a couple of paper copies left of only issue 1 was paper copy. I can send you one, and if you want, I can send you 2. You can raffle off another one to your listeners for charity if you'd like. But I did that for a while, and it was just it was mostly digital issues. And then I ended up going back to Olympus Union, and I did a kind of a reboot of that universe, and I had been doing that. And then I kind of got into I got my itch for Antares Ascended, and this is something I'm probably going to be writing for many, many years. But at some point, I'm going to get myself caught up enough that I'll have enough buffer between when the next issue has to come out and when I have to actually start writing the catch-up issues again. I can see myself going back to Olympus Union again, because you get caught in these worlds that you make, and you think, oh, you know what I can do with that character, it would be really cool, and it's just fun.
That's fascinating. That's really cool. So with Antares Ascended, you asked a lot of your Twitter followers and some select groups questions to get to help create the world a little bit, to flesh out the world, or at least bounce some ideas off of, I think was the biggest thing. Was this the first time you've ever done that, or how did you get that idea to start bouncing off ideas off Twitter people? So,
I've found that probably in the last 6 to 9 months, I've become a lot more active on Twitter again. And when I started doing the Antares Ascended stuff, I like playing with SurveyMonkey. It's always interesting to me to get the idea, to get a handle on what people are thinking. And I was going through when I was fleshing this world out, and I have to give credit to my buddy, and here we'll call him John Dunn, so that if ever in the future he comes to light, it's like, yeah, John, I'm giving you credit for this. He always talked about the idea that you create this like really, really fleshed out world, and then you only end up showing the readers maybe 30% of it, but it's there, and it's the underlying principles and properties and understandings of what your world is, so that when you're writing, you're taking those things into account, even if nobody else knows about them. And as I started to build this stuff out, I found myself writing and writing and writing, and just wanting some opinion on some of it. It's like, am I going in a weird direction? Is this too much? Are these names stupid? Because sometimes you find yourself doing work on something at 3:00 in the morning, and you don't know if it's a really awesome idea or it seems awesome because it's 3:00 in the morning. And I got tired of bugging my wife because, she's supportive, but after a while that's got to be annoying. And I kind of got tired of bugging my, the same old friends over and over. And I started thinking about it. I was like, I wonder if, all of these people who I follow and who have followed me, and we've had all these different science fiction conversations, I wonder if any of them would be interested in just hearing what I'm doing and kind of weighing in. And so I started asking a couple of people, and a couple of people more, and a couple of people more. And I think at the end of the day, I ended up having to have 3 separate groups because of the way that Twitter does things. And there were probably about 35 to 40 people who made up what I called my panel. And it was cool because I would go and I would, I would say, hey, on today's thing, here's the bit that I want you guys to think about. And then I would, you were on it, right? So, I would throw a survey out, and I tried to keep it so that, there was always going to be the last two things on the survey were always going to be, any general comments about stuff, and then, what's your Twitter handle, so I know who to go back to and talk to. That if you have something that either you had questions about and you want to talk through with me, or that I like what you said and I want to talk through with you, and then there were usually 2 or 3 questions, actual questions, multiple choice, just about things, and it ranged from anything like, are any of these? Do you think any of these names are stupid? Like what names? And it turned out there were a couple of names that people just really hated. So I, so I was like, all right, I'm going to change these names. And there were a few that I did that I felt they were kind of bigger, and sort of one-off stuff. So I took them beyond the panel, and I went out to other folks at large. I think I did that with the names of the gods in the pantheon, and 1 or 2 other things. But it was really neat because there's this lump of flesh that's in the middle of the palms of the Homyns. And that's Homyn. Another sneaky clue as to, hey, that almost sounds like human. It is. But there's this thing in the center, and part of the idea is that when you have 3 or more people joining those together, you enter into something called Karva, and it's a unified mind, almost like a hive mind state, and they use it for things like the justice system and for ruling and for religion and different things like that. But I was really torn on what I was going to call it, and I put out a bunch of these different things, and folks, it was really close for a little while, and then it became overwhelming majority for the eventual winner, the Volet, which I liked because my daughter is Violet, and one of the things that I threw in there was just taking it very similar to her name. So that was cool. That it was like, all right, I'm really, really seeing this. And then other times, there was something where in the comments, one of the panelists didn't like the fact that they couldn't see the evolutionary point, and they wanted me to flesh it out and to kind of change what it was. And so I kind of had put that out to, I took that comment and I put it out to the rest of the panelists, and they, overwhelmingly agreed. So I went, and it forced me to think things through more deeply than I had before about this particular point that I thought this was more of a throwaway thing, and here we are, hundreds of years later, we're already in it. But she was like, yeah, this is something that I think even if you never mention it, it's something that you have to have in your underlying architecture. And so I did, and it was really cool. Um, and I was shocked today, or today, maybe it was yesterday, that I had put out four logo designs that I had, and there were two that were almost the same. They just had different font types that I really liked, and I figured people were going to pick one of those two. And then there was one that I really didn't like, and one that I completely hated, and everyone hated the two that I loved. And I'd say it was probably like maybe a 70-30 split between the other two. It's like I never ever would have thought. Here I'm looking at this and thinking, oh, it's not awe-inspiring, it's not interesting, it's really not going to capture people's interest. And man, was I wrong. And it was kind of funny that it worked out that way. So it's been really neat to get people's perspectives, and I'm grateful for all the folks who were kind enough to really weigh in there.
Interesting. Yeah, and I kind of see it because you mentioned how you've already gotten some of the stories written and we're getting ready to go, and this is more of the expanding the world. So this is kind of like the Revan Codex to the Bulgariad, if you get my reference.
See, I don't know. I mean, I actually didn't start. I had my idea behind the world, and I actually waited until I'd say that I was about 80% through with the panel and setting the world up before I actually started writing. I knew my overarching concept, right? I knew that this was going to be something where it was, at the base, it was going to be Ogan Antares versus Tupon Verichoa. And I knew that I was going to have, and I mean, it's not really a spoiler. You'll find in other issues that the fact that, Tupon basically has his father murdered, who is the Archon's brother. He has his aunt, who is the Archon's wife, murdered, and he has his older brother murdered. And and he believes that's clearing his way to the throne. And so I knew that was going to be the core concept. But the other stuff around that, that all kind of grew out of just talking through and sorting the panel out, and the importance of the different planets, the increasing importance that the gladiator competitions that I named, that we named the Tauran Games. And what was interesting, in fact, that my original name, the Bellator Games, turned out that that's like an MMA thing. So I had to come up with a new name, and the panelists to really help me make that happen. Actually, a panelist was someone who let me know that it was an MMA thing. And then the fact that it just sort of became more important, to the point where I actually had decided that, the Archon's youngest son, one of the princes, Sargon Antares, is a pharaoh, one of the fighters fighting in the Tauran Games. And it was just kind of cool how the just how it evolved and put me in a position where then I was actually able to say, okay, here's my overarching storyline for the first year. And that's something I actually intentionally did, that I took this from Grant Morrison. Did an interview in DC Nation a couple months ago about how he was approaching writing the Green Lantern. And he said that they were going to do it as almost like an old school police procedural, where every issue they were looking at as an episode, and they were looking at the first year's worth as a season. And so there's an overarching theme, but that each one can sort of stand on its own. And I think that my series is a little more interconnecting than that. But I do want it to be something where somebody could come in and read and start picking up and not be too completely lost if they were to say, come in, like 3 or 4 months down the line, or even further on, kind of like, you can read the Malorian without reading the Belgariad, and you can go back and read the Belgariad and feel comfortable. And I want it to be something kind of like that.
Okay. So for those who are wondering, you should not read the Malorian without reading the Belgariad first. It makes it much better if you have. Much better.
It does read much better. I'm just saying you can.
Yeah, you can. It is possible. It is possible. They do set it up in a way. Not so much if you're trying to read the second Sparhawk trilogy before the first. That one doesn't work as well. But Malorian, yes.
That's true.
And then stuff like the Revan Codex just gives you extra padding. It's not as much as when I was reading, say, Wheel of Time, and I had to buy like the World of the Wheel of Time book to figure out what the heck is happening. Where are these places? Okay, I see it. Because like that book is so massive that it's like you have to figure out where the heck you are, and it doesn't have as many handy maps when you have an audiobook, which I learned to rely on.
What would you say is one of your most underrated science fiction books or trilogies?
That I love? The White Mountains or Tripods by John Carpenter.
Okay.
Or John Christopher, not Carpenter. Christopher.
I usually will go to the Hyperion Quartet. I think not enough people by Dan Simmons. I don't think enough people have read that, and I keep hearing that it might be a miniseries or a movie. I feel like, then everybody's going to go and read it. So
I hope so, but definitely with like the White Mountains one, those ones I think that people ignore them because they're young adult books. They're small and they're written in the '60s, and it's written by a guy that's not his real name. But it's about teenagers that get capped. These caps on their head when they turn 14 and become serving as aliens, and it's a lot deeper than people give it credit for. Especially when you get to the last book and you realize, this guy's really smart. He knows exactly how the world is functioning in the '60s with politics and so on. And I found it incredibly deep. But a lot of people haven't read it. I wish they did because they're really good books. But yes, Hyperion's another one. I was trying to read another one of his books. Is it Ilium?
Yeah, so that's what comes. Are you talking about Endymion that goes later on, or are you talking about the different series?
It's a different series. It's I think it starts with Troy actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually haven't gotten to read those yet. It's on the long list.
Well, his books, he gets really, really deep. And the thing is, like, sometimes I'm in the mood for, say, a lighter fare, which I consider Orson Scott Card a little lighter. They move quicker.
Yep.
And then sometimes I'm in the mood for, let's dive into this 1,400-page George R. Martin novel. But with kids, I kind of stick to the shorter ones because...
Yeah. I mean, there's the thing is that people don't realize there's such good stuff out there. And sometimes it's some of the bigger name guys, and sometimes it's some folks that you don't know. Listen, Foundation series, to me, I did the trilogy all pretty quickly, the original trilogy really quickly, because I thought there was depth, and yet you were able to move through it, with some speed. There's a book by Timothy Zahn called Manta's Gift. It's a standalone, and it is tremendously interesting. But there are some parts where you're like, okay, I have to think this through. Okay, now that makes sense, and then you take off running again. And I think I like that with Zahn books. He had the Quadrail series and stuff like that, where there are slower parts where you have to be a little more analytical, and it's almost like he's setting you up for, okay, we're gonna walk through this part right here, and now we're gonna go sprinting for another 5 chapters. And it's got a really cool pacing the way he writes.
One thing that I'm really give Amazon itself credit for, because people who don't remember, Amazon started off as a bookstore.
Oh yeah,
that's what Amazon was, and they're still most because all the other bookstores are dead. But they're still the biggest retailer of books in the world. But I think one thing I give Amazon credit for with the Kindle, especially when it started doing free books on Kindle, it changes. Some books are free for like a day and so on.
Sure.
Is that got me reading a lot more authors that I would never have read before, and it really expanded. Before, when I bought a book, it has to be a book from someone that like I have to know I'm going to like this book because I never grew up with a lot of money, and so like if I'm going to buy a book, it's going to be because I know I'm going to like it.
Yep.
Amazon kind of untethered that, and so now I'm like, this book is free. What's the worst that's going to happen? It's free, and so it makes it so that I, am buying a lot more books, a lot more things now that I never would have, because I'll read that first book, it's free, then I'm like, well, I know I'm going to like this next one. It's only like $1 or $2, so yeah, why not? And that's really gotten me to expand my horizons into a lot more authors. And I know it's not necessarily the best system for themselves to get money.
Sure.
But as a reader, it's been an awesome blessing to be able to expand what I'm able to be able to read and get my hands on.
I agree. There's this. Gosh, I'm trying to remember now. I follow him on Twitter. I've actually reached out to him, and now I can't even think of his name. But he does this series. I think it's called like the Metaband series. And I happened to get the first book for free. It was one of those Amazon, preview or whatever it was, like those special things. And I bought the other two, and it was, and to me it was like, it doesn't bother me that it's, $3 or $4 for something of not a very well-known author, because he was really good, and the writing was good, and I thought it was really Tom Reynolds, that was it. So I thought that he was really talented. I got into a series called The Breakers for a little while because of that. I find myself buying them, and I'm like you, that especially when I was in my high school years, and then even when I came back from college, I would go and I would hit the used bookstore and get these paperbacks for 50 cents, for $1, and that was my way to be willing to try something I hadn't done before. And Amazon just makes it so much easier, that I'm appreciative. I mean, I know there are folks who have picked my stuff up for free before and have actually come out to follow me and have come on as fans. So that's that's always cool.
And one thing I'm really appreciative about the way you're releasing your stuff is you mentioned at the beginning how they're like serials, which is how I was mentioning earlier, how that's how the Dark Tower started. They were started off in the newspaper, and Stephen King would write all these little short stories. That's why the first Dark Tower book, people, is a little different than the rest. It was written as a bunch of short stories put together. But a lot of the older ones, John, the John Carter of Mars books, or the Solomon Kane books, the Robert Howard ones, Conan, they were all serials. Especially Solomon Kane. If you don't know Solomon Kane, there's a movie. That's okay. It's not bad. It's good, okay to decent. Like it's pretty true to the character. It doesn't adapt to a book. It's pretty true to the character and the world, and it has an awesome look to it. But the fact that you're only going to get one is kind of the sad part. But a lot of these old ones, they were all serials, and that's how people got it. H.P. Lovecraft, those were serials. He didn't just write the Neuromonicon. He didn't just like put that out on the bookshelf. People read their books in magazines, in the newspaper, and little bits at a time. And I like how you're doing that, and I like it how Stackpole mentioned it, how he's doing that sort of thing. It seems an awesome way to reward Patreon people, because I've done a lot of Kickstarters and so on, and it's sometimes a pain to wait for a product, be it a CD, be it a game, be it a book, that can be years to go. And the way you're doing it, people can at least get something as they go rather than years.
Well, I look at it also in a sense of so anybody who follows me on Twitter knows I'm a huge Nightwing fan. I'm currently a disgruntled Nightwing fan. Dan DiDio, if you're listening, I'm a disgruntled Nightwing fan. But I religiously buy that book every single month. And the thing is that part of why I actually priced my Patreon where I did was that, having written a comic book for a little bit, I understand the amount of content that goes into the comic book. I understand the content that I was putting into that, and I decided to kind of put the low tier right around the same thing as a comic book, right? Because it's a bit more content than a comic would be, but obviously I'm not quite as beloved yet. But I get that in that monthly bit. And I've actually decided every so often I'll decide, hey, I want to go back and I want to start somebody else who's already in progress. And I did that with Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps recently, or I guess not that recently, I guess a couple of years ago. And I went and I bought all the collections, and it's cool to do that, but it's like I find that the time to sit and do that, I'm doing it with Aquaman right now, and after Aquaman I'm going to be doing it with Wonder Woman, through the Rebirth stuff, where it's like just to find the time to sit and read a big long collection like that is I just don't have as much time. And the same thing with, I've been working through the second new Thrawn book for longer than I should. And when I was younger, I had tons of time to, I could kill a weekend where, I could do half a book, in a day and still get other things accomplished. And now that, I am begrudgingly a grown up and have to do the work thing and the dad thing and the, And I love those things. I mean, I love my job and I love my kid, but I don't have as much time to read, and being able to get things in bite size. The fact that I can do the Stackpole stuff and it's not, I don't have to read a novel. It's reading the stuff that he's putting out as he's putting it out. Very much like old school pulps and serials and magazines and stuff like that. It really makes it easier to consume things. And I mean, listen, if the guys in Dune put out a Patreon or any kind of subscription service where I could get myself 2,000 to 3,000 words a month, I'd be in immediately, because it allows me to enjoy that and not have to worry about, do I have time to sit down and make it through a couple of chapters before something happens.
And for those of us who are like my way of getting around the fact that it's really hard for me to read books now is audiobooks, Audible. If there's a good reader, I can go listen to those books. Like I'm right now, I've really wanted to get through the Peter Sarakowski, probably just butchered his name, but the Witcher books. They've been around for a few decades now, and the games are sort of related to them, but not. But I wanted to get through them, and Audible was the best way to do that because I have more time driving and traveling than I do sitting and reading, and that helps a lot. And you still get through them, and I've always been a more an Audible learner anyway. So I hear things, and so whenever I had to memorize a book, I'd read it and listen to it. I had to do it for school, and that got me, through a lot. And so it definitely helps. And I think I'm definitely, as long as the pricing is right for a Patreon to read a little bit at a time, that's definitely seems to be the best way to go. As long as it's consistent.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's part of what I like is so month one came out, or issue one, episode if you prefer, came out. And we did I did November, and I made sure it popped on November 1st. And then there's three separate components, right? There's the main storyline. There's the mythology, and then there's a pharaoh profile. And so what I'm basically doing is that on the first of the month is when the main storyline comes out. So you want to follow what Ogan Antares is doing, and Tupan Verachoa, and hey, how's that rebellion going? Have they tried to slaughter him yet? What's going on? That's all going to be. I'm trying to position this for the first of the month, and so that's when issue one came out. I actually have. Actually, I should double check and make sure I got the date right. But issue two should already be in the system scheduled to go out on December 1st. And I'm in the process of wrapping up writing issue 4 already. And my goal is to eventually see if I can, get up to issue 6 done by the end of the year. That way, those are all stacked up and ready to go. And then the mythology, I created this pantheon of gods. Because I don't know, it just sort of felt like that sort of interested me, and so going through, I always loved Greek and Roman mythology. It was very interesting to me, and they were written as, when you read the myths, they're still acting quite human, and acting in a way that you're reading them as stories no different than you would read the regular adventurers, Jason and Perseus and all those guys. So I'm kind of writing it like that, giving them their personalities, clearly making some of the things they do impossible. But so, one of those is going to go out every month, and I'm trying to have that as its own flavor, and that happens later in the month. And then do a profile on one of the fighters every month, because I think that's kind of neat. And then I'd actually create a simulator, because by background, I was a computer programmer before getting into my current line of work. And so I actually wrote a simulator where I have all of the fighters, the pharaohs, lined up, and I can pick and choose, and I run the fights between them, and I have the play-by-play that comes out. And so I'm actually putting up some of the play-by-play, and there's a tournament every month for each of the 3 major worlds, and so people get to read that. And it's like that. Those are the things I'm trying to do to keep it consistent and just keep it fun.
Well, it looks like we are just about out of time. So we've talked about this Patreon, and so on. Where can people find you on Twitter, and where can people find your Patreon and any other ways to look up your stuff?
Sure. So Twitter's probably going to be the easiest place to find me because it's just at GBBLOOM. So that's GB Bloom, the initials in the last name. The Antares Ascended Patreon itself, it's patreon.com. So for those who don't know, that's PATREON. So patreon.com/Antares Ascended. So I'll spell that out for you guys too. It's ANTARESACENDED, and I know it's a mouthful. So if you look at me on Twitter, you'll be able to very easily see the link. It's kind of pinned up right at the top, and I'm happy to obviously give you the link if you want to post it along with the recording here to make life easier for folks.
Fantastic. And when did you say your next part is being released? Is it December 1st?
Yeah, so issue 2 will go up December 1st. But if you are subscribed to the Patreon, you do get to see all of the stuff that's already out. So you can easily get the first one. And what I posted today, in fact, is a preview that gives you, if you hit the Patreon, you'll see there's a free. It gives you a little bit of background. It gives you a sampling from issue 1. It gives you a sampling from issue 2, and it gives you a sampling from the first mythology, so that you can actually go ahead and get a taste of the world, ahead of having to actually put any money down and see if you like it.
Nice. And it's pretty good so far, folks. It's well written and well thought out, and you still can get a little bit of input in there. I'm quite sure you're still accepting people's thoughts and nudges.
Oh, absolutely. You know what? Comments are great. Shoot me something on Twitter. I'm even happy to enter into a DM conversation, as you well know. I do like thoughts and feedback, and just because I have a place that I'm going doesn't mean that there's not room for creativity and for modification.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. Thank you for being on. I'm quite sure we're going to have you on again. I have an idea where you'd fit quite well. We pretty much read the same books, which means we pretty much want to talk to the same people.
Well, so. I'm happy to talk to you again anytime. This has been really, really great, and I appreciate you having me on.
You're welcome, and I look forward to having you on again. But for now, folks, that's all. Hope you guys enjoy your holiday weekend and stay safe out there with the weather. And if you're in the warmth where I am, still stay safe, because when snow comes down, it makes it worse.